Achewillow, Season 5, Chapter 4, Everything is Not Okay. Immortal. That's the rumor going around town about the Achewillow raccoons. It's not common knowledge that the 6 trash pandas that live in the alley behind my cafe are inordinately long-lived, but the fact has made its way into the local collective unconscious. There are even raccoon crossing signs on the side of the roads around here. This morning, as the sun was about to blow its first kiss to the sky, I'm faced with the possibility that while immortal, the unofficial city mascots aren't invulnerable. Where age may slip and falter, finding no purchase upon the garbage kings of Achewillow, pure violence cannot be denied.
How is he?
The words are desperate. They are infused with a plea that would otherwise seem pathetic, especially when discussing wild animals. The way I sound, it might as well have been one of my own children that I found in the alley. And how could I not be passionate about this? Sure, the raccoons and I have had our differences. We've locked horns on many occasions, and Mother knows how much salt they've stolen from me over the years. In the end, though, they've also been instrumental in my survival more than once. The Don, czar of trash and leader of the raccoon family, once pulled me back from a demon so real I still bear the marks it left on my skin. Still, seeing the bloody, wounded body of the raccoon I only referred to as the fat one for the longest time, it broke me. The other 5 animals sat around, the Dawn scratching at the door, and Brioche, my little favorite, frantically licking at her companion's wounds. I don't know that the thieving band had ever faced this sort of crisis. Even Crimson, the aggressive one, seemed more confused than angry. "It'll live," the doctor answers, pulling off a pair of purple latex gloves. "But I think that, at this point, it'd be more humane to put it to sleep."
What?
I've been standing in this room for a little over an hour, waiting for news. Dr. Pavlov wouldn't have been my first choice of a veterinarian for a pet. If I had a cat or a dog, I'd have picked just about any other vet before coming here. First, they're far more specialized in cattle and farm animals, which doesn't make them unqualified to handle Fido and Mittens, but I'd rather someone with more experience caring for a family member. Second, their clinic lacks for the amenities city vets have. There's no waiting room here, no shop with racks of dog toys and cat treats. Only the cold, empty, and sterile examination room. The walls are bare, save for a mosaic of diplomas and certificates. Even the colors are drab and soporific. "Euthanasia," Dr. Pavlov explains. "This is a wild animal, Miss Dufour. Between the extra weight and a missing limb, the little guy doesn't stand much of a chance out there." All the while, the good doctor keeps scratching behind the ears of the fat raccoon. The poor creature is sedated with a bandage around its left hind leg. Mouth open and tongue drooping, it looks like some drunk, passed-out, overweight frat guy. I also don't have the facilities or the staff to help it convalesce, let alone rehabilitate. The doctor's fingers express an affection for the fat, furry patient that their words fail to convey. I wonder if the dispassion is an act, a mask they wear to distance themselves and perhaps help me distance myself from the raccoon. "I'll take care of it," I volunteer without so much as a second thought. They shake their head and smile. It's condescending, I can tell, the sort of expression you give someone who failed at understanding simple instructions. "This is a wild animal, Ms. Dufour," they explain. "You're not simply going to drop a litter box in one corner and a food bowl in the other and hope for the best. It will get restless. It will destroy furniture and chew through your possessions, all so you can one day release it outdoors where it'll get picked off by a stray dog or hit by a car. You're not doing yourself any favors, and I doubt you're doing it any either." The fat raccoon lets out a wet grunt, adjusting the posture of its head for a second. Dr. River Pavlov shushes it, stroking the fur on the animal's snout. Even if it were for only this single overweight raccoon, I would hesitate long and hard before allowing the cold hand of medicine to take his life. Watching the big black nose dripping with snot and the front claws pawing unconsciously at the air, I'm reminded of the Dawn, Brioche, Crimson, and the others. How they looked up at me from the back porch of the Achewillow, liquid eyes begging for me, the human, to do something. I crouch so I can rest my chin on the cold brushed steel of the examination table, eyes level with those of the sleeping raccoon.
Hey,
I whisper, expecting a sigh of exasperation from Dr. Pavlov.
what about you? What do you think? You up for a fight, or would you rather call it?
After all, how old is this raccoon? If the legend is correct, all 6 have been alive since the days of Philomène Dufour, meaning this particular rotund specimen may very well be over the cusp of a century in age. How long do you have to live before you get too tired and just let go? There's a shiver that travels through the raccoon's fur. It yawns and smacks its lips. For a brief moment, that fat lover of pastries and garbage opens his eyes. Not by much, nowhere near the beady marbles that stare up in anticipation when I dump leftovers in the bin, but just enough that I see it. The blue, that mysterious glow that dances ever so slowly far at the back of the Achewillow raccoon's eyes. They all have it, barely visible during the day, it's most obvious at night, when the 6 of them stare out from under the dumpster's lid. "I'll take care of him," I say, repeating myself, but with far more conviction. "Just tell me what I have to do, and I'll take care of it." The doctor sighs, and I tilt my head, still scrutinizing my fat friend's features. The sigh isn't one of resignation, at least I don't think so. There's a hint of relief in it, as if the dire warnings were a difficult responsibility for Dr. Pavlov, but one they had to get through, hoping I would make the right choice. "For now," they explain, "you have nothing to do. I'll immediately call one of my colleagues to assist, and we'll perform the amputation today. This little guy will stay with us for a few days while we make sure he's recovering well, then we'll hand him over to your care. My recommendation is that you do your best to raccoon-proof your home and make arrangements to have someone with him at all times for the next few weeks." I don't know that I can do that. I don't know how destructive he'll get as he regains mobility. I'm not sure who I can ask to keep an eye on the raccoon while I take care of my cafe. The only thing I know is that I'll figure it out. Hopefully, a raccoon 5 times my age has grown smart enough not to be too much trouble. I'll draw you a list of what to feed him and how to change his bandages. You'll have to monitor the wound and help him get around. I nod at everything the doctor says. As the pieces come together and the reality that the raccoon will one day see his family again sinks in, I'm overwhelmed with a short but bright sense of joy and relief. "What about prosthetics?" I ask, as if that were a perfectly normal question. "You're serious? This is already going to be an expensive surgery." Cost wasn't something I'd considered. I don't think it would have impacted my decision regarding the euthanasia, but now that Dr. Pavlov mentions it, the very real weight of that financial blow becomes hard to ignore. Like the overpowering smell of a potent curry, once noticed, it will not leave your nostrils. I just want to know what the options are, and the costs. The first signs of incredulity are beginning to appear on Dr. Pavlov's face. The young woman who, tears in her eyes, brought in a bleeding raccoon, one of its paws nearly torn out of its socket, is now asking where to get and how much an artificial raccoon leg would be. I bet when they woke up this morning, Dr. Pavlov thought they'd mostly be checking up on pregnant cows and sheep, not dealing with the crazy witch from the cafe. Then again, they are a veterinarian from Achewillow. Who knows what weird and wonderful things they've seen? I'll give you the name of a specialist, they answer, a smile both amused and incredulous on their lips. Now, before I let you go, there is one final formality. I dread and expect that this will be about payment. Maybe they need a deposit. After all, once the surgery is done, if I refuse to pay or simply vanish in the night, they can't exactly undo the amputation. I nod, giving the occasional glance toward the slumbering patient. I doubt you can give me much of a medical history for this little guy, the doctor explains, and they're right, I can't. But I have to put a name down in his file. A name. 2 of the 6 raccoons came pre-equipped with names, the Dawn and Crimson. I christened Brioche myself, naming her after her favorite food. The other 3 have remained nameless so far. Roberts, I say, suddenly struck by inspiration. He's named Roberts. I'm naming him that. Dr. Pavlov squints, as if by doing so they could read the symptoms behind my sudden choice. Is this a pirate thing? They ask. Because of the leg? Like the Dread Pirate Roberts? I was thinking Bartholomew Roberts, but that works too. The doctor shakes their head again, smiling more broadly and honestly this time. They pick up a notepad from the nearby counter, pushing aside a jar of cotton swabs and a bottle of tongue depressors to reach a pen. As I watch them take down the name, still amused by the choice, I decide that perhaps things are going to be okay. Okay is a funny word. It has origins dating back to the first wave of abbreviation that swept over the East Coast and Boston in the early 1800s. Kids of my and Annabelle's generation think we're cool with our lols and our BRBs, but in the early 19th century, they were trading letters without so much as the benefit of text message, let alone the internet. On a micro scale, OK is a get-out-of-jail-free card of social interactions. How are you? We're asked, and we answer, OK, to be done with it. It's also a word we can apply to bite-sized events. Back when my life was a disaster, I had plenty of OK days. A dish can be OK while the whole meal is an unpalatable catastrophe. That's when the macro gets you. The big picture, a tilted, torn canvas. In this case, the ruined portrait is that of 5 raccoons who can't understand what happened to their friend. It's a long line of clients waiting to get their morning coffee. It's the deepening mystery of what is happening to the animals of Achewillow. You better go, I tell Annabelle. You're missing school, aren't you? She shrugs from the driver's seat, one hand on the wheel and the other ready to pull the keys from the ignition. Everything about her body language tells me she's not even thinking of going to class. From the slumped shoulders to the distant look as she studies the dozen or so patrons waiting for me to open the door. That's a lot of people, she observes, dodging the question. You up for handling all that? No, I reply after a long pause to contemplate the clients. I'll probably just tell them we're closed until lunch. Call Stefan and see if he can come in an hour early. The engine quiets and Annabelle leans over the wheel. A few patrons start to notice that I'm in the car, using their hands to shield their eyes from the rising sun. I'm not looking forward to informing the uncaffeinated that they will get no communion at the Church of Coffee this morning. Judging by the bags under their eyes and the sluggish dragging of their feet, they are likely to riot if denied service. Or, Annabelle says, unbuckling her safety belt, I can sling drinks while you take care of whatever you need to take care of. I study the line and notice Ian, the head pilvist, that cult who worships the cloud above Achewillow like a goddess. He needs his daily croissants. Michael, the painter, smiles from behind his thick mustache, happy to see he'll soon get his daily dose. Then I look at my lap, the neatly folded terry cloth towel I used to wrap Roberts in and take him to the vet's. Dark umber patches cover the majority of its surface, blood staining the worn cerulean blue in swaths. Your mom'll kill you if you miss class, I complain. Then she'll figure out I was involved and kill me too. I think that boat has sailed. It's a matter-of-fact reply, but I already know what she means by it. Looking up, I scrutinize the line and, just as expected, There they are. Mayor Lagacé and her counterpart, Mayor Byrne, both in line with the rest of the crowd. Except where most see a welcome release from their cravings, Lagacé sees a disobedient daughter.
Tell you what,
I say, opening the door.
you go talk to her, and if you survive, feel free to start serving coffee and pastries. Just don't forget to give Ian his croissants. It's probably not a good day for us to anger a goddess.
I don't wait around for her answer, stepping out into the nascent morning. My shadow stretches long, bridging the gap between Annabelle's car and the front door of my cafe. Those who had not noticed me before certainly have by now, but others are starting to recognize that something isn't right. Slowly, I cross the distance, bloody towel hanging from one hand, fishing my keys out with the other. The warmth of the sun caresses my back, casting my shape into silhouette. Something in the buzz of the crowd shifts as I come more clearly into view. The dawn crowd is, in more ways than one, its own village. These people share the early hours like a crew might share a ship or a gang might share a handshake. Their secret code is that of the rising sun and the quiet street, and in many ways, I'm at the center of that. To the morning crew, I'm less of a kitchen witch and more of a coffee shaman. My problems are their problems, and my crisis is for the whole group to shoulder. They see my weary eyes, and they notice the dragging of my feet. Most of all, they take dour note of the blood on my apron and the stained towel in my hand. The need for caffeine is replaced with a need to help and support. I know they mean well, but I lack the bandwidth to engage. Questions over what happened to me or if I'm okay flood my ears but get blurred into the cacophony of thoughts already racing in my mind. I slide the key in the lock and open the door. I don't bother locking it behind me, but also make no effort to invite any of the waiting customers in. The lights remain switched off in my wake, and the bloody towel slips from my fingers before I can even make it to the register. Confused but unwilling to intrude, my customers remain outdoors, watching me disappear through the back door. Back here, the air smells of stale garbage and drying dew. I look to the forest in the distance and allow myself to collapse onto the concrete steps. Within a minute, the porch light flickers off, and I'm left in the gray penumbra of a dying dusk.
I know you're there,
I whisper, looking at the dumpster. I can see the shining blue eyes piercing the shadows. 10 little dots of sapphire, equally spaced in pairs. Clicking claws scratch on corroded metal as I climb out from their palace of trash, loping towards me with shy, hesitant steps. The Don, biggest of the tribe after Roberts, hisses at the others, jumping in front of them and snapping his jaws at their snout when they get too close. Only once he's got his people under control does he dare approach me. He sniffs at my hands dangling between my knees. Little black fingers grab at my left index, studying the caked-on blood covering it.
He's fine,
I confirm, though I doubt he understands.
It'll be a few days before you get to see him again, though. Is that okay?
Only a lunatic would expect an answer. These raccoons are smarter than most, smarter than some people, in fact, but there's no telling how far that takes them. Once satisfied with his inspection, the Don drops his ass on the asphalt at the bottom of the steps, staring me down. The language barrier between me and this animal is almost palpable. I can tell he's trying to tell me something too, but there's simply no way we can understand each other.
Who did this?
I ask. Part of me almost expects his little mouth to start moving, lips churning out words as he gives an answer, but that fantasy doesn't come to pass. A click and a squeal sends the Don and his gang scattering. The door behind me inches open. The raccoons make it to the foot of the bin, the Don snarling his irritation back at me when I hear the telltale tap of high heels on concrete at my side.
Would it help to remind you that it's just an animal?
Helen Edna, Notary Public.
We both know that's not true, and even if it were. Right,
she says, lowering herself to sit next to me. Her movements are careful and slow, observant of every inch she'll be touching in the process.
You Dufour women are all the same, aren't you? Here, I thought you could use this.
Ever the portrait of professional elegance, Helen is wearing a beige skirt and vest over a white shirt. Her equivalent of spring fashion, I suppose. She's holding a mug in each hand, offering me the one in her left.
Thanks.
I take the mug, careful not to burn myself on the hot ceramic.
But I'm not sure I want to be like all the Dufour women, if you know what I mean.
She doesn't answer immediately, taking the time to look around, rediscovering the back alley. She sips from her own mug, tightening her lips in whatever passes for a smile in Helen Edna.
Any news from Vicky?
She asks, dodging my question with the grace of a bear in a pastry shop.
Postcards, mostly. She got upgraded to a speaking role and received an offer for a short. It's a prestige project. Low pay, but she'll get to work with a few big names.
Helen settles her gaze on the dumpster. The faint blue glow of 10 eyes look back. After a moment, she digs into her jacket pocket and pulls out a crisp Achewillow Cafe paper bag, specked with a few grease stains. I bet I can guess exactly what's in it, just from those stains.
You sound pleased,
she ventures, perhaps earnest, perhaps sarcastic.
I am,
I answer, a little too loud.
Save a girl, watch her move away. I could do far worse as patterns are concerned.
With deft fingers, Helen opens the paper bag and pulls out a chocolatin. The Dawn sniffs the air, intrigued but careful.
There are worse ways of losing a friend,
Helen says, tearing off a piece of the pastry, tossing it in front of the dumpster. The raccoons don't need more of an invitation to crawl out and investigate. But I don't think Helen realizes the animals she's dealing with. The refuse residents of Achewillow are smarter than the average raccoon by a wide margin. They are to soup what most animals are to broth. Similar, but more. The piece she tossed is small compared to what remains in her hand. The Dawn sees this. Crimson sees this. 4 raccoons, hungry and scared, make their way to us, forming a wall of fur at the bottom of the steps. They will not be satisfied with scraps. We don't call him the Dawn for nothing. He and his crew look and act like gangsters, unafraid to intimidate the sweets out of anyone's hands.
Just be careful how much of yourself you give,
Helen warns, raising the remains of the chocolatin to show the raccoons.
Doris was like that too, so hungry to please and thirsty for gratitude.
For a moment, I think she's going to toss the pastry to the raccoons. Instead, she stuffs the whole thing in her mouth, leaving but a few crumbs on her fingers, which she flicks in their direction. It's the most un-Helen Edna thing I could imagine. The Dawn hisses and growls, outraged by being teased this way. Especially on this day, when one of his own has gone missing. Crimson and the others are equally frustrated, and for a moment I fear they might attack Helen for her affront. Adding insult to injury, when the Dawn does turn around, hoping to at least feast on the scrap that was tossed to them, all he finds is the 5th raccoon, my precious brioche, finishing off the final vestiges of the chocolatin.
Sometimes,
Helen says, struggling to swallow the massive bite she took.
You just have to pick the lowest hanging fruit and be happy with that.
I watch Brioche, surrounded by a resentful, jealous family, and wonder how happy she is at having scored that stray piece of chocolatin. A better Miriam would have taken everything Helen said to heart. An understanding nod and a promise to heed her warning was all it would have taken to avoid a disapproving shaking of her head. But that is not the Miriam I am right now, and Helen Edna, notary public, isn't there to witness me ignoring her advice. She cannot shake her head at what she doesn't know is happening. Not to mention that, if I were a betting woman, I'd wager this is exactly what Doris would have done. Not to be too hyperbolic about it, but I can almost feel her spirit nodding in approval. It's in the way things align, with Stefan arriving early for his shift, just in time with Eric coming back from whatever errand he's been running. It's even in how the coffee machine cooperates, delivering delicious brews without so much as a spray of steam in my direction. It's in how my favorite table, the one a row away from the window and near the center of the cafe, is free just as I need it. I gather my gang at that table, sitting around an assortment of cookies and mini cinnamon rolls, along with generous mugs of coffee and mochachinos to fuel our endeavors. From the outside, we look like a student group cramming for an exam or putting together a team project, but unbeknownst to the rest of the community, we are far more than that. We are a war council. There was a time when it would have been Gulliver, Olivia, and I that made up this round table. My thoughts too easily stray to how, the more I settled into Achewillow, the less we came to rely on each other. Life moves on, I suppose. I just wish that...
I feel so stupid,
Eric says, scrutinizing the broken leash.
It's so obvious. You're being too hard on yourself,
Annabelle comforts him, pulling a cinnamon roll apart before nibbling on a piece.
It's only obvious because we know.
He's doing the same thing Detective Wilson did, rubbing his thumb on the frayed end of the leash, feeling the difference between the chewed-up portion and that little bit that's neatly cut.
Do we know if Puffin's the kind of dog that chews his own leash?
Eric wonders aloud.
Puffin wasn't the kind of dog to chew his own food,
I say.
For all Odessa's quirkiness, she had one hell of a well-behaved little corgi. She never let him in the cafe, always making him wait by the window outside. I've never seen that dog so much as bark at a passerby. If you ask me, I'd rather Puffin in here than that orange cat of Ophelia's. Still on that, are we?
Annabelle pops the last of her roll into her mouth, stifling a laugh.
When do I get to meet this monster of yours, anyway?
Eric asks. Never, if I can help it. But I keep that thought to myself. I can already hear the bitterness in my voice just mentioning her cat. I have better things to do than go on a rant about Ophelia.
Do we know,
I say, changing the subject with all the finesse of a steamroller,
if the leash was cut then chewed through, or chewed through then finished with a knife? Assuming it's a knife at all,
Annabelle interjects, grabbing 2 cookies at once from the plate. Eric watches her, the early traces of a smirk on his lips. These two are fast becoming thick as thieves, which is why I'm glad they're in my new and improved cohort. He picks up a cookie of his own and looks on as Annabelle annihilates her treats in 3 swift and merciless bites.
Don't they feed you at home?
Eric asks, taking a nibble and sharing a mischievous wink. It's a joke, of course, but I can see Annabelle get defensive. Her hand, already reaching for another cinnamon roll, retracts back to her plate. Fingers hesitate for a moment before finding some security on the handle of her mug.
They kinda do,
she says, eyes averted.
And they kinda don't.
The sudden strain and doubt that covers her face is a decidedly un-Annabelle look. Curious, confident, and outgoing, those are the traits I associate with her. She is, in so many ways, the very things that I'm not and wish I were. But right now, at the mention of her family, she almost reminds me of that poor raccoon, Roberts, when I found him this morning. Wounds less bloody, but just as fresh, and with origins just as mysterious. I expect Eric to prod or to mock, not in a malicious way, but I've been in the dumps before, and I know that clumsy teasing is how he tends to offer comfort. It's charming at a time when charm is pointless. Instead, it's a different Eric that shows up.
Hear, hear,
he says, raising his own mug, tapping it lightly to Annabelle's.
I know the feeling.
What was that? I have so many questions for Eric in that moment. Is he just trying to show empathy? Is something wrong at home with Dante? With our parents? This is hardly the time or the place for these questions, especially in front of Annabelle, who seems to bear an even heavier burden than I first assumed. I want to be 2 separate people in 2 separate places. I want to comfort Annabelle and listen to her woes. I want to be the friendly shoulder on which she cries the problems with her mother. And I also want to grill Eric on what he meant with his commiseration. But I get the opportunity to be neither. Maybe this is what Helen meant about settling for the low-hanging fruit. In this case, that would be helping the pets of Achewillow. Or at least, I'd like it to be. I hear the chimes, like a warning, and without looking up, I know that she is here. Now, I'm sure most people would pat my hand and tell me it's all in my head, but I swear that an evil wave of cold swept across the cafe when she arrived.
You wanted to see the monster, Eric?
I nod with my chin at the unwelcome intruder. She walks to the register, head held high with her bag over her shoulder. I can't hear her or read her lips, but I know she's ordering a chai latte. It's her usual. She pays, giving Stefan a broad, friendly smile and dropping a few coins in the tip jar. Ophelia waits, scanning over the dining room, looking for something. She's dressed warm for the weather, thick stockings under a wool skirt and a knit sweater over a white blouse. Every color a very seasonal pastel. She looks like the Easter Bunny's personal assistant. Her eyes pass over me without so much as a twitch of her brow, coming to rest only a foot to my right on an empty table. Can I kick her out or refuse her service? Would she make a fuss if I did, and is it worth the hassle if she doesn't? She sits. I can hear her pulling up a chair and depositing her plate and mug on the table. Rustling and shuffling indicate that she's settling in. I expect that skeins of wool are being pulled from her bag, the material components for her latest project. William, her cat, will remain in the bag, curled into a ball atop the rest of her belongings. The ticking and tacking of needles begin, signaling the start of hours of knitting from my rival.
I'm going to be honest,
Eric says, looking over his shoulder with all the subtlety of a crêpe flambée.
She doesn't look that terrifying.
A chuckle escapes Ophelia's mouth, and I know she hears him.
Anyways,
I say, hoping beyond hope to move the subject along.
About those missing animals. Right.
Annabelle gets the hint, grabbing the leash from Eric's hand.
I guess the first question is, does this have anything to do with the raccoon attack, or are we dealing with different incidents?
Is that likely? Eric sounds surprised at the possibility.
In Achewillow?
Annabelle answers, tossing the leash on the table for effect.
More than you think. First things first, I suppose.
I draw upon my limited experience investigating things in this town, and on the few conversations I've had with Detective Wilson.
One of us needs to compile a list of missing pets from all the posters in town. Then we need to call the owners to see if there's a pattern in the disappearances. Time of day, circumstances, part of town, anything.
Eric nods, and I assume he'll take care of it. After all, he's the one with the empty days, and jogging around Achewillow was probably on his agenda anyway.
I can make the calls,
Annabelle volunteers.
Excellent.
I feel things coming together at last.
I'll see about warning the people that come to the cafe and I know to have pets. Better safe than sorry. Oh, and I'll call Horace Mitchell. Man has gone through enough without losing one of his million animals.
We're about to adjourn our impromptu meeting, Annabelle taking a handful of cookies for the road, when a hand reaches over from behind me and picks up the broken leash. The ticking and tacking has stopped, but I never heard her chair. Ophelia.
Can I help you?
I spit, turning around to face the rude intruder. My outrage doesn't manage to so much as snag the weave of her indifference. Instead, she observes the fraying of the leash with obsessive concentration. She pulls at the thread and brings them up to her eyes. Her investigation doesn't limit itself to the broken portion either. Every inch is examined and studied, like an archaeologist might obsess over a freshly dug artifact. After a moment, there's a pause. Her eyes grow wide, but for a fraction of a second. The knot in her composure is short-lived, but it doesn't go unnoticed.
You okay there?
I tease, hoping she'll just go away. She looks down and through her nose, regarding me with overwhelming amounts of pity and condescension. This is our dance. Ever since she set foot in Achewillow, Ophelia has looked down on me, spitting at my establishment and insulting my skills as a witch. It used to be clever, passive-aggressive barbs, but has turned into something far more direct and venomous of late.
I'm fine,
she answers, dropping the leash back on our table.
But you? You might want to stick to Pillsbury rolls and Nescafe.
I'm about to stand up and throw my fists, but something shifts in Ophelia's demeanor. However much she wanted to stab at me, her warning takes on a cold sincerity.
You are way out of your depth here, Miriam.
Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Achewillow to donate. Achewillow has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Achewillow for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.